Because at the moment we have a temptation, I think, to suppose, here's the world, some places have lots of, water and food and nice things, and some places don't, and isn't it awful? And then the point is to take the water and food from there and bring it over here, or not, because it may cause mild problems. But if you think in terms of things like the resource curse, the curse of having these blinking things, as well as the curse of not having them, it does seem to draw attention to the importance of the economic, and back to the importance of the economic and political instruments through which we distribute resources. And I think it is perhaps to that, more than the actual lack, that both Professor Ashford, when he's talking about innovation, and Professor Hall, and I can't pronounce your name, from yesterday, we're talking, and maybe it is then important to see that in addition to lack, you can have the curse of having the resources which others want. And so what matters really, maybe what we need to focus our attention on, again, is this issue of the politics and economics of how we distribute resources. It seems to me the crux.
John, a very final and very short point. Indeed, it's not a matter of resources. Otherwise, Nigeria or Saudi Arabia would have been the most advanced countries in the world. It's mostly an issue of governance, lack of corruption, and also distribution technologies. Amartya Sen got a Nobel by proving that during the Indian famine, and that was the case with the Greek famine during the German occupation and the Irish famine, very fertile land was producing goods that were not distributed to those who needed them. In fact, Amartya Sen proved that during the Great Indian famine, India was producing more crop than ever. So management skills, transfer of management skills is as important as resources. Thank you.
Okay. Anybody want to comment?
Said too much.
Maybe we're really getting to the wrap-up point now, so I think there's no other urgent hands up. I'd like to invite the panel, maybe he'll be back in time, if you'd like to each make a very short comment, or pass if you like. Michalis.
Yeah, I think that all these issues, sustainable development, green economy, innovation, ethics, science, need to be linked. That is something that I try to highlight in my presentation. However, I think we need to follow a much more instrumental approach, a much more, let's say, practical way of thinking, and try to come up with a set of definitions. If we don't define the terms of the play, then we might get, again, lost and confused, and we might start designing policies, adopting laws that will be lost in interpretation. And lost in translation is the worst syndrome for legal science and the worst nightmare of every legislator. So I think it's important if we try to if not at the global level, as I said, I'm not in favor of global solutions. I don't think there are global solutions exist. I'm a context-oriented person. I think that, especially for ethics, you need to be context-focused. If you try to apply uniform, one-size-fits-all approaches to this type of issues, then you might find yourself in front of a big failure. And that is something that we need to start thinking of, that this tendency, this trend towards globalization that occurred during the last 20 years has to be reseen, and I think there is a paradigm shift, and this, from local to global, has to be reversed and start thinking of from global to local again. That's.
I think we have to do is distinguish two levels of problem. One is an immediate one, that in 30 years we have to reduce emissions, as I understand it. So we have a short-term critical thing, and I think the solution to that is we have to accept to impose costs on ourselves, whether or not we're able to impose them on other people. The second part of it is, meantime, while you're doing that, you try and rectify imbalances of injustice and so on. I think the main thing you try and do is promote democracy, bearing in mind that war doesn't promote democracy. You have to do it through these other means. But it seems to me there are two different problems. One we have to deal with immediately, and as well as we can. It's imperfect. Meantime, we try and fight on the other front as well.
John.
Your turn. Words of wisdom, please.
No, but a certain amount of relief. I think I've had a very good say in this conference, but I've been listening very carefully to the questions and the comments from the floor this afternoon, and I think they've been marvelous and humbling in many ways. So thank you all very much indeed.
Catherine?
Yeah, I've just got a couple of quick responses, actually back along on the panel. I think one thing is with ambiguous terminology that, again, you need to look at why that still persists. Again, we've had a lot of time to sort of refine these concepts, and I think the reason it persists is because it's politically very useful. People like to have ambiguities in treaties because they can then interpret them in the way they want, but they can still be seen to get a consensus. And not surprisingly, I take issue with the fact that we don't need global solutions. I agree that you don't need one-size-fits-all solutions, but for a lot of these problems, we can't proceed as individual states. And it will need global coordination of action and things like that, so I'll leave it there.
Thank you.
Okay, again, picking up points from the panel, I mean, we have to be a little bit careful about democracy and assuming that democracy is the only thing that works. What's important is accountability. I said at the end of my own talk that we have to worry about using a Chinese model because China is bad on human rights. Well, it's bad on political rights. It is possible that China has one of the best records in maintaining the human right to food, and certainly better than a lot of democratic countries. But I also agree with Catherine that you can talk about universal values, and you can talk about them in terms of local application of universal values. So, for example, the value of accountability and transparency of governments. And I think you can talk about the reasons why we're very far in the UK or the US or Greece from having got rid of corruption or selfishness. These things exist. But we can normatively say that they exist in smaller amounts than in many developing countries. And the reason for that is because we have over centuries incrementally introduced institutions and laws which make it less likely that you'll get away with it. And you're more likely to be punished if you do. So it is about, I mean, you have to assume that human nature is such that if you have a large society and there is an opportunity for corruption, somebody will take it. But if you rule out the opportunity for corruption, or you minimize the opportunity for corruption, and you do that through, I mean, I'm a big fan of the American Constitution, for example, checks and balances. And this is why I think you can normatively argue that democracy or other forms of accountability to the poor of governments is a legitimate and important way forward in terms of not just food, but in terms of all public goods.
Thank you all very much. I shan't attempt to sum up because it's far too rich a tapestry to do that. And anyway, the following session 5, we shall do exactly that, summing up the whole meeting collectively. So what I'd like to do is to, once again, on behalf of myself and this panel, thank the hosts, the organizers who've made all this possible, and to now please give a hand to the panel who've done a sterling work for us. Now, I imagine some of you may want that little comfort break that John sneaked in already. Let's rearrange, and the final session 5 be up here in 5 minutes, okay?